Hello there, and welcome to Nowhere to Hide. Happy Independence Day, by the way. We're going to talk a little bit about what it is we're actually celebrating today and why the cause of freedom is never completely officially secure. In other words, there has to be some heavy lifting done every single generation. I've got details coming up.
All reporters are biased, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.
Once again, welcome to Nowhere to Hide. I hope you have a great Independence Day holiday planned and maybe get a little chance to spend some time with family and friends. And of course, Independence Day, some people just call it the 4th of July. Some people just look forward to parades, fireworks, barbecue, not working, that kind of thing. And that's all fine and dandy. But when it comes to what we are celebrating, somehow we have allowed ourselves to be sidetracked. Because if people really thought about what they were celebrating, they are celebrating a point in time where a group of concerned citizens had the moral clarity to stand up to their government and say, enough. You are no longer doing the job for which you were enacted, which is to protect our God-given rights, which is what limits your power over us. And because you won't do that, because we have this long train of abuses that they listed out, we will henceforth govern ourselves. And so they announced their separation. So we're celebrating secession in a very real sense, but obviously there was a lot of risk in what they did. It wasn't a slam dunk. It wasn't like, oh, they were the cool kids and stood up and declared their independence from Great Britain. No, they had to fight the British, and the king was not going to let them go. And in fact, if you look at this historic marker that was put up, by signing the Declaration of Independence, the 56 Americans pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. Now, this was no idle pledge. 9 signers died of wounds during the Revolutionary War. 5 were captured or imprisoned. Wives and children were killed, jailed, mistreated, or left penniless. 12 of the signers' houses were burned to the ground. 17 lost everything they owned, yet not a single one of them defected. Their honor, like their nation, remained intact. Now, why do I bring this up? Because I know it's easy to pretend, well, they did the hard work, they declared independence, they founded a country, and all we have to do is coast. But that's not the case, because there is always opposition, there's always tension, and there is pressure to reduce freedom. And some of it comes from just human nature, that desire to control other people. But my point is, in order to stay free, you've got to have people consciously busy working at preventing policies from being enacted that limit your freedom, and preserving those policies that limit government so that you can experience and use your freedom as you choose. So let's take a look at some of the things that the Idaho Freedom Foundation has been working on here of late. And I just use these as examples to show how that fight for freedom never really stops. And if we're going to keep Idaho free, we've got to take some pretty serious action at the state level. So we start with this article from Fred Birnbaum about state sovereignty requires Idaho action against illegal immigration. Now, you know that there is immense activity taking place at a national level right now to rein in illegal immigration. And there has been a fair amount of activity here in the Gem State, although it's been curious to see the agricultural interests and dairymen's interests that have kind of pushed back against this and said, well, we can't afford to lose these affordable, labor forces and so forth. Anyway, we'll talk a little bit more about the rhinos who can't quite bring themselves to enforcing immigration law. But here are some of the reasons why action is required at the state level. Fred writes, in the 2025 session, our focus was on legislation aimed at demagnetizing Idaho by eliminating free handouts and enabling better coordination between local and federal law enforcement, thereby facilitating quicker expungement of criminal aliens. And in addition, he points out, we supported legislation that criminalized harboring illegals by organizations. We beefed up the verification of citizenship for voting and determined the citizenship of students getting a taxpayer-funded education. House Bills 83 and 135 were ultimately signed by the governor. Unfortunately, he points out, House Bill 83 watered down the stronger provisions in HB 11 at the behest of some agricultural interests. We noted the following regarding HB 93 in our rating. However, he talks about how the act would not broadly focus on illegal immigration, instead prioritizing enforcement actions against those who the bill defines as dangerous illegal aliens. So this isn't just a matter of rounding up, whoever speaks different or looks different. The bill's definition of a dangerous illegal alien is one who's been previously convicted or found guilty by judgment or withheld judgment of a dangerous crime in this state or any other state or nation. So the feds are doing some, but you got judges fighting back and blocking it. Obviously some work being required here at the state level. And of course, reducing the bird feeder effect of if we just give enough benefits, the people will come to them. If you stop giving benefits, that likewise is a strong incentive not to come gather around what was once the bird feeder. Also, last month, we had the Supreme Court uphold state bans on youth trans surgery. So this is protecting kids from needless surgical or chemical mutilation at the behest of this new healthcare niche of gender-affirming care. And here are just a few of the statements that were made. This is from Idaho Freedom Foundation President Ron Nate. In a 6-3 decision, the Supreme Court upheld a Tennessee state law banning trans surgeries and hormone blockers for minors. Now, this historic decision sets a precedent that will confirm similar laws in 25 other states, Idaho included, as constitutional. Now, Ron reminds us, back in 2023, the Idaho Freedom Foundation invited detransitioner Chloe Cole to Idaho to share her heartbreaking story. And she went into excruciating detail about her journey, how children are targeted with radical gender ideology, how the medical establishment profits from their confusion, and how so-called gender-affirming care causes deep, lasting harm. And it was those surgeries that led both her and others down a dark path from which they are still recovering. And that was her testimony was very instrumental in getting the Idaho legislature to pass the law protecting children. And Ron points out we were honored to play a role in getting House Bill 71, the Vulnerable Child Protection Act, across the finish line. It wouldn't have happened, though, if not for Chloe. She spoke to legislative leadership in a private meeting to convince them of the harm these surgeries cause. Chloe had a profound impact just a year before this very same bill died in committee. All right, next. Idaho has a spending problem, not a revenue problem. This isn't one of the sexier issues, and you don't hear a whole lot of news coverage of budget issues. I mean, granted, yes, there's some talk of it, but it's not as mesmerizing as, oh, it's a bill about library books, it's a bill about abortion, it's a bill about this or that. It's it's numbers, and for some people, it's boring. But this is where government really starts to get out of the control of the citizenry, because it can't function without money, and government can't make money of its own, so it has to take from those who produce. And when we talk about the Idaho government having a spending problem rather than a revenue problem, you have to understand that right now there is a fair amount of concern that, Idaho is $141 million behind tax collections at this point. And Fred Birnbaum says, now we're told to be scared. Could Idaho's government run out of money? He says, don't be afraid. This is manipulation here. In fact, the ending balance in the general fund is now expected to be only $278 million, which is $141 million less than the $420 million projected. So in other words, it's a shortfall that's not a deficit at all. It's a missed forecast for tax collections against a general fund estimate of nearly $6 billion. So you put it in that context and suddenly it's like, oh, well, it's not like, we're going to stop the sun from rising in the morning. But Fred points out the tone of the article is what's all wrong. The focus should really be on government spending, not on tax collections. How so? Well, he says, you see, the shortfall is only a shortfall from a forecast, not on the more meaningful year-to-date comparison between tax collections for this year versus what was collected in 2024. So far, after 11 months, tax collections to the general fund are up 2.9% compared to the same period last year, totaling $145 million. But that's not the whole story. According to tax commission data, state gross tax receipts are up by 4.5%, or about $310 million compared to last year. We don't hear a lot about that from our legacy media or some of the usual suspects crying about any decrease in government spending. So Fred says, let's return to the discussion on spending, because this is where the focus needs to be. He says, as we've noted recently, it's impossible to get a precise number for the growth of government over the past couple of years because appropriations are increasingly being moved off budget. Now, these continuously appropriated funds are not included in the Legislative Service Office's summary of fiscal year 26 spending, and they weren't included in earlier years. However, He says it's more of a problem because additional budgets have been moved to continuous appropriations, making year-over-year comparisons for fiscal year in 25 and 26 impossible. So don't get distracted by mainstream headlines, is Fred's message. Revenues are actually up, but spending is up even more. And the budget really needs to focus on spending. It's better for Idaho that we make government leaner rather than burdening families further and businesses up further when they're already struggling under a variety of regulations and other taxes. Hopefully that makes sense. And these are, again, just three little issues here. The funny thing is, you'll hear people talk about, well, you know, the whole protecting children, that was a totally unnecessary thing. But is it? It's not like a bunch of conservatives sat around going, how can we possibly, make a marginalized group feel even more marginalized? No, it was a marginalized group which somehow gained the advocacy of the entertainment industry, the news media, academia, most places in government, most of corporate America, and yet we're supposed to believe that, oh, they're the underdogs. I mean, we just had a whole month that kind of proved that wrong. But it's because this issue has been forced to the front by people with agendas, and particularly those who are trying to advance anti-freedom agendas. You can't have freedom if you can't govern yourself. And I'll just leave that for further exploration at another time. This much we do know: there are plenty of Republicans out there who talk the talk of small government. Look at that. They put that lipstick on the pig. Oh, yes. As a regime Republican, I am for smaller government, especially when I'm running for office. But it's business as usual in how they conduct themselves. And we can see this with the Freedom Index. It comes through loud and clear. This is one of the reasons why some of the politicians in Idaho really dislike the Freedom Index, because it's not so much, a tool to campaign against them. It's a tool to hold them accountable and show that this is what you actually voted for. And they don't like that. It's easier to speak flowery words from the stump and try to woo your heart and your emotions. But yeah, when you actually show them, but you did this, you supported this, for some reason they don't like that. Well, nobody said keeping freedom was easy. After all, wasn't it Ben Franklin at the end of the Constitutional Convention who told a woman who asked him, what kind of government did you give us? And he said, it's a republic if you can keep it. He did say if. So let's do our part. Let's keep that republic. Happy Independence Day. I'm Brian Hyde, and this is Nowhere to Hide.
All reporters are biased. The Idaho Press Club are biased. All media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.